Okay then, so this video is going to be about the 1992 general election. What you need to know for the exam basically are the circumstances behind the election, the key features of this election, the role which party leadership of both sides played in the outcome, the role in which the media played in the outcome of this election, the role in which party manifestos, ideas played in this election outcome, all of these different things. And what you need to be able to do is compare the reasons why one party won and one party lost to the 1997 election and another election after 1997, and of course any other elections which take your interest across this period. So, to begin with, let's look at the background to this election. So, the Conservatives were in power. They'd been in power since 1979. Mrs. Thatcher had led them to victory in 79, 83, and 87. They had quite a big majority. It was well over 80. I think that might have been near 100 in the 1987 election. However, things had gone wrong for the Conservatives after 1987. Mrs. Thatcher left power, that's the nicest way of putting it, in November 1990 against her will. There'd been the poll tax riots. There'd been lots of grumblings in the Conservative Party about her leadership. And she'd been replaced by John Major. John Major was a very different kind of character to Mrs. Thatcher. He was far more kind of quiet. He appeared more consensual, i.e., more willing to take on board different people's ideas, that type of thing. But he was left with some real big problems. He had to deal with the poll tax and its consequences and about a reform for it. He also had to deal with an economic downturn. The last year or so under Mrs. Thatcher has seen an economic recession taking place, and it seemed to affect mainly middle class people and the more wealthy as well. People who'd naturally been supportive of Thatcher and Thatcherism. So these were some of the problems which John Major had when he became Prime Minister in November 1990. Now, the very last date which an election could be held was 1992, and John Major held that election for April 1992, virtually the end of the time where a new election was required. Assume so he could try and establish himself as an alternative Prime Minister to Mrs. Thatcher, begin the process of making some of the changes needed, and also, I'm guessing, the hope that the economy might have improved, and so therefore they could campaign on that issue, because the economy was something which the Conservatives liked to argue was in their kind of field, if you like. It was their kind of strength. Now, during the 1992 election, the Conservatives' main focus of the election campaign was Labour can't be trusted. They brought up images and they brought up memories of 1979 with the strikes and things of that nature. So they really went for Labour over taxation. The Labour leader was called Neil Kinnock. Again, a part of this Labour can't be trusted with this kind of view that Neil Kinnock was an untrustworthy person to be Prime Minister. And they also played on the fact that John Major actually came from quite a poor background. He's one of the very few Prime Ministers who hadn't been to university, came from a very poor background in London. And again, there's an advert which they made with John Major where it shows him kind of fanning his old house, which is on Terry Street in a poor part of London. And the way he campaigned was very differently as well. He got on a soapbox and stood in the middle of market squares with a big kind of microphone, yelling at people, no, vote Conservative and stuff, and lots of people around him booing and heckling, etc., etc. But it appeared very down to earth. Many Conservatives were unhappy with the election campaign. They thought they were going to lose, and it is really unprecedented for a party to win a fourth term of office. They thought that they might well lose this election due to all these other problems. So, what we're going to do is that they focused very much on taxation. This was a very hard hitting advert they ran in January 1992, and then it was accompanied by posters which showed very similar images. So, let's watch this video of one of their election broadcasts of 1992.
January 1992. Labour is so keen to get into power that they've been making lots of promises. Adding up the cost of all the promises Labour have made to date, it comes to an astonishing £35 billion extra a year. Where would they get this money? They have already announced 8 new taxes, which would amount to the biggest increase in taxation since the war. But it's still not enough. Where would Labour get the rest of the money to pay for their £35 billion worth of promises? From the rich? There aren't enough around to pay for it all, even if you tax them at 98%, as Labour did before. So Labour would have to come up with something else. Something that would hit everyone. To pay for Labour's promises, the average taxpayer would end up being hit by an extra £1,000 tax bill. Unbelievable? Well, remember, the last Labour government put up the basic rate of tax to 35p in the pound, which today would be the equivalent of an extra £1,000 a year for the average taxpayer. So where would you find an extra £1,000? You could give Labour an extra £1,000 a year simply by cutting spending on food and groceries by £20 a week. If that doesn't appeal to you, you could find the money Labour want by making one big saving. You could give up the family holiday. Of course, this may not be too popular. Come on. So where else could you find Labour's £1,000? Well, there must be another way of raising the money. You could get rid of the car. There must be £1,000 saving there. Don't like the sound of that? All right. You could keep your car, but give up your evenings. Do some minicabbing. You could get the work by dropping circulars from door to door. If you can't raise the money to pay for Labour, you could go on strike for it, which might explain why strikes go up under Labour. Under the last Labour government, 29 million working days a year were lost through strikes. Last year, with the Conservatives, we had the lowest level of strikes for 50 years. But striking doesn't work, as we all remember. So what about doing some extra work? How would you feel about putting in a few extra hours to pay for Labour's promises? Maybe a farmer should spend a few more hours out in the field. What about a busy fireman? Would he like to put in an extra shift or two to pay for Labour's promises? What about you? You? Surely someone is prepared to labour more for Labour. Surely teachers just have to take some extra classes in the evening, couldn't you? Well, nurses could always work a few extra hours, couldn't they? Fortunately, Labour's tax bombshell need never happen. The world recession has made it tough for all of us in Britain. But with taxes down, interest rates down, strikes down, and inflation down, Britain is now poised to gain most when the world recession ends. The last thing it needs now is more taxes from Labour.
So I think the message is quite clear there, isn't it? The Conservatives fought very much on the ground, well, their strong ground traditionally, which is about taxation and the economy. And he saw at the end there, they're talking about, yes, the economy's had some hard times, but thanks to us, it's not as hard as it could be. And as had to say, it was a global recession as well. So you see there, the Conservative campaign was very well focused in this election, largely about taxation, which was Labour's kind of weak point. The Labour Party tried to counter this. Just as the election was called, like a day or two later, they published what they call their shadow budget, i.e., what would be their first budget if they were in government. And they said, no, this is what we're going to spend money on, this is where the money's